Toyota, Honda, Nissan, Mazda, Subaru. Say those names to your father and he will tell you they are the most reliable cars ever built. Say those names to a 25-year-old car buyer in Bangkok right now and he will laugh at you before driving away in a BYD. In 2023, China overtook Japan as the world's largest car exporter for the first time in history. In 2024, they widened the gap to 5.3 million vehicles. That same year, Nissan announced 670 billion yen in losses and started cutting 9,000 jobs. Honda's CEO used the word survival on live television. And Toyota, the company the entire world copied for 40 years, is now half a decade behind a Chinese phone company that just started making cars. The Japanese auto industry is not declining, it is collapsing. And these are the 12 reasons why nobody can stop it. Factor 1. China is demolishing Japanese market share in Asia. For over 50 years, Southeast Asia was not a competitive market for Japanese automakers. It was a monopoly. Toyota, Honda, Suzuki, and Mitsubishi owned Thailand, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Vietnam with a grip so tight that local buyers treated Japanese badges the way Americans treat pickup trucks. It was not even a decision. It was just what you bought. Your father drove a Toyota. His father drove a Toyota. The local mechanic only knew how to service Toyotas. The entire ecosystem was locked in. That era is ending right now, and the speed of the collapse is what makes it terrifying. BYD, Chery, MG under SAIC, and Great Wall Motors are flooding into these markets, with vehicles priced $5,000 to $15,000 cheaper than their Japanese equivalents. And we are not talking about stripped-down penalty boxes with blank dashboards and cloth seats. These are fully loaded EVs and plug-in hybrids with massive touchscreens, advanced driver assistance systems, premium interior materials, and build quality that would have been unthinkable from a Chinese brand 5 years ago. Thailand is the clearest example because it was Japan's single strongest overseas market. Thai roads were basically a Toyota and Honda showroom for decades. Chinese brand market share in Thailand jumped from 2% to 11% in just 2 years, from 2022 to 2024. BYD now outsells Honda in Thailand's EV segment. Read that again. BYD outsells Honda in the one market Honda considered completely unbreakable. Dealerships that sold nothing but Hondas for 30 years are now adding Chinese brands to their showrooms just to keep the lights on. Indonesia, the biggest auto market in all of Southeast Asia, is now offering massive tax incentives specifically designed to attract Chinese EV manufacturing plants. The Indonesian government is not being subtle about it. They want Chinese factories, Chinese technology, and Chinese pricing for their domestic buyers. They watched what happened in Thailand and decided to get ahead of it. Japan's backyard is being invaded, and they are losing ground every single quarter. But losing market share, as painful as it is, can theoretically be fought with better products and better pricing. The reason Japan cannot fight back is the next factor, and it is the one that keeps Toyota's board of directors awake at 3 a.m. Factor 2. The EV gap is now unbridgeable. Here is the thing. Toyota's decision to bet on hydrogen fuel cells and double down on hybrids instead of going full electric was not a stupid decision in 2020. It actually made logical sense at the time. The charging infrastructure barely existed. Battery costs were still high. Range anxiety was real and justified. Toyota looked at the landscape and said hybrids are the bridge and hydrogen is the future. On paper, that logic was sound. Smart people made that call based on real data. On the road in 2025, it looks catastrophic. Toyota's first serious mass-market EV, the bZ4X, launched with a recall within weeks because the wheels were literally falling off. When they finally fixed that problem, the car still delivered only 250 miles of range in ideal conditions, with charging speeds so slow that road trips became an exercise in patience and parking lot waiting. Honda's answer to the EV question was the Prologue, which is not even Honda's own technology. It is a rebadged General Motors vehicle built on GM's Ultium platform. Honda, the company that built the legendary VTEC engine, the company that won Formula One championships, is borrowing EV technology from Detroit. Let that sink in. And then there is Nissan. Nissan had a 10-year head start on every automaker on the planet with the Leaf. 10 full years of EV experience, customer data, battery research, and real-world feedback that no other manufacturer had. They could have owned the affordable EV market globally. Instead, they never built a competitive next-generation vehicle. The Leaf aged into irrelevance, while Nissan focused on internal politics and alliance drama, and now they have nothing credible behind it. Meanwhile, BYD's Blade battery technology is conservatively 5 or more years ahead of anything coming out of Japan. Chinese brands are pumping out entirely new EV models every 6 months. Japanese development cycles still take 4 to 5 years to bring a single model from concept to showroom. That is not a gap that closes with effort and good intentions. That is a gap that widens every single quarter. And here is the part that breaks the old narrative completely. Factor 3. Chinese cars are now genuinely better. This is not 2015 anymore. 5 years ago, you could laugh at Chinese cars and be right. They were cheap knockoffs with questionable safety ratings, copycat designs borrowed from European luxury brands, and interiors that smelled like a chemical plant on a hot day. That reputation is dead and buried. The BYD Seal outperforms the Tesla Model 3 in European safety tests. The Xiaomi SU7, built by a company that was making smartphones and rice cookers 3 years ago, broke the Porsche Taycan's lap record at the Nürburgring. That is not a typo. A Chinese car made by a phone company lapped the Nürburgring faster than a Porsche. NIO's battery swap stations let you pull into a station, swap a depleted battery pack for a fully charged one in under 5 minutes, and drive away with full range, solving range anxiety in a way that no Japanese brand has even attempted, let alone built infrastructure for. Li Auto's range-extended SUVs deliver over 1,000 kilometers of total range on a single tank and charge combined, which eliminates the range argument entirely. Build quality, interior materials, and technology integration from the top Chinese brands are now matching or succeeding Japanese quality standards in independent testing. Euro NCAP crash ratings, the testing equivalent of EASE in Europe, are confirming it with published data, not opinions and not marketing claims. The narrative that kept Japanese brands dominant for decades, Japanese equals reliable, Chinese equals cheap junk, is finished. Younger buyers under 40 across Asia, the Middle East, and increasingly in Europe are choosing Chinese vehicles on merit, not just on price, on merit. And when you look at exactly how much cheaper these cars actually are on top of being better, the numbers are genuinely brutal. Factor 4 price destruction line these up side by side and tell me how Japan competes. A BYD Seagull, a fully electric city car with a modern interior and a real infotainment system, costs under $10,000. A BYD Dolphin, a compact hatchback that competes with the Corolla-sized segment, costs $15,000 to $20,000. A BYD Seal, a mid-size sedan that goes head-to-head with the Tesla Model 3, costs $25,000 to $30,000. Now the Japanese side. A Toyota Corolla Hybrid, which is still fundamentally a gasoline car with a small electric motor, starts at $23,000. A Honda Civic Hybrid starts at $29,000. The Nissan Ariya, Nissan's flagship EV and their best shot at the electric future, starts at over $40,000. Do the math. Chinese brands are selling fully electric vehicles at the same price Japanese brands charge for gasoline cars. A buyer in Bangkok or Jakarta or Sao Paulo can walk into a showroom and choose between a Chinese EV with a touchscreen and a 400-kilometer range, or a Japanese gasoline sedan at the same price. That is not a hard decision for a young buyer in 2025. In emerging markets across Latin America, Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia, where price sensitivity decides everything, Japanese brands simply cannot compete. Their cost structures make it mathematically impossible. Japanese labor costs are high. Their supply chains are expensive and distributed across multiple countries. The persistent strength of the yen squeezes margins on every single export. Japanese automakers cannot match Chinese pricing without losing money on every vehicle that rolls off the line. And losing money is not a strategy, it is a countdown. Those economics explain the industry-wide trend. But for one specific Japanese company, the situation has already gone from troubling to existential. Factor 5. Nissan is on the edge of collapse. Nissan is not struggling. Nissan is not having a rough patch. Nissan is fighting for its survival as an independent company, and the clock is running out. The Honda-Nissan merger, talks that dominated automotive headlines in late 2024, collapsed in early 2025. That merger was supposed to be the lifeline, two weakened giants combining resources, technology, and manufacturing scale to create a company large enough to compete against Chinese volume. It fell apart over disagreements about control, branding, and who would actually run the combined entity. Nissan is now completely on its own, with a balance sheet that gets worse every quarter. The numbers are devastating. Nissan is forecasting a 670 billion yen operating loss. They are cutting 9,000 jobs globally. The Opama plant in Japan, one of the company's core manufacturing facilities, is reducing production. The Renault-Nissan alliance, which was supposed to be the strategic foundation of both companies for decades to come, is effectively dead after Renault sold down its ownership stake and walked away from any pretense of partnership. Nissan's EV lineup offers no path forward. The Ariya is underperforming against every competitor in its price range. Too expensive for what it delivers, too slow to charge, too late to market. The Leaf has been discontinued in many markets. There is no next-generation Nissan EV that anyone is excited about. Cash reserves are burning at a rate that has financial analysts openly writing research notes, questioning whether Nissan survives as an independent company past 2027. If Nissan collapses, it would be the first major Japanese automaker to fail since the post-war era, and the shockwave would not stop at Nissan's doors. It would send an unmistakable signal to every investor, every parts supplier, and every car buyer on the planet that no Japanese auto brand is truly safe, not even Honda. Factor 6. Honda's quiet restructuring. When a CEO stands in front of cameras and the international press and uses the word survival to describe his company's situation, you can safely assume the internal reality is worse than whatever he is saying out loud. Honda CEO Toshihiro Mibe called the current period a survival phase for Honda. Not a transition, not a challenge. Survival. The company is responding the way every corporation responds when the ground is shifting beneath it. Cutting models, merging internal operations, closing underperforming factories, and borrowing technology from competitors to buy time. Honda is shutting down factories in China where sales dropped over 30% in 2 years. Their China joint venture sales collapsed from 1.5 million units to under 1 million units annually. That is not a dip. That is a market evaporating. The Prologue EV, Honda's current answer to the Chinese onslaught, is built on General Motors' Ultium platform because Honda does not have its own competitive EV architecture ready for mass production. The Zero Series, Honda's dedicated EV platform that is supposed to save the brand, will not launch until 2026 at the earliest. And by that time, Chinese competitors will have cycled through another 2 or 3 generations of EV technology and driven costs down even further. Honda is doing everything a restructuring playbook tells you to do. Cut costs, reduce exposure in failing markets, borrow technology you cannot build yourself. But none of these moves address the fundamental problem. The technology gap and the pricing gap between Japanese and Chinese automakers are structural, not cyclical. You cannot cut your way to competitiveness when your competitor builds a better product for half the price and iterates on it 4 times faster than you can. Honda at least admits the situation is dire. Toyota, the biggest Japanese automaker of them all, still believes it can win this war with a technology the rest of the world has already abandoned. Factor 7. Toyota's hydrogen bet is failing. Give Toyota credit for one thing. The Mirai is a genuine engineering achievement. A production car that runs on hydrogen, produces 0 harmful emissions, generates only water vapor from its exhaust, and refuels in 5 minutes is a beautiful piece of technology. The engineering that went into the fuel cell stack alone is remarkable. The problem is that almost nobody on Earth wants to buy one. The Mirai has sold fewer than 25,000 units globally across 2 full generations of the vehicle. For context, BYD sells that many vehicles every 3 days. Not every 3 months, every 3 days. Hydrogen refueling infrastructure barely exists outside of Japan itself, and a handful of stations scattered across California. Toyota bet heavily that governments and energy companies around the world would build the hydrogen refueling infrastructure needed to support fuel cell vehicles at scale. That bet has not paid off. A decade later, the infrastructure still is not there, and no major government is prioritizing it. Meanwhile, Toyota delayed its dedicated battery EV platform, now promised for 2026, while Chinese automakers are already manufacturing vehicles on their third and fourth generation EV platforms. Toyota remains the world's largest automaker by total volume, and that fact creates a dangerous illusion of health. In the markets where EV adoption is now effectively mandatory, Europe with its tightening emissions regulations, China with its new energy vehicle mandates, Toyota is becoming irrelevant. Their market share in China's EV segment is statistically invisible. The company that invented the Prius, that defined what automotive innovation meant for an entire generation of car buyers, is now the slowest major automaker on the planet to adapt. And the reason that slowness matters more than ever is a gap that Japanese engineering culture is structurally unprepared to close. Factor 8. Software and tech gap. A modern car is a software platform on wheels. The screen, the apps, the over-the-air updates, the driver assistance systems, the integration with your phone and your entire digital life. For buyers under 40 years old, these features are not nice to have extras. These are the product. This is what they are buying. Chinese brands understood this fundamental shift 5 years ago and built accordingly. BYD, NIO, Xiaomi, and XPeng all developed their software stacks entirely in-house from day one. NIO is running full highway autonomy in China right now, today, on public roads. XPeng can navigate complex city streets without human input. These companies update their vehicles the same way Apple updates an iPhone, overnight, while the car is parked in your driveway. And when you get in the next morning, there are new features waiting for you. Japanese brands are a full generation behind on every single one of these metrics. Toyota's infotainment systems look and feel like they were designed in 2016 and never updated. Nissan's ProPilot Assist technology is a full generation behind the advanced driver assistance systems Chinese companies are shipping today. Honda's connected services are minimal at best. Buyers under 40 in China, Europe, and increasingly in the United States rank screen quality, app ecosystem integration, and over-the-air software update capability as their top purchase criteria when shopping for a new vehicle. Not engine sound, not door close feel, not brand heritage, not reliability reputation, software. And Japanese automakers lose on every single one of those criteria. Japan's auto industry built its empire on mechanical engineering excellence. Precision engines, bulletproof transmissions, obsessive quality control on physical components. The market has moved to software engineering excellence, and Japan's automakers do not have the talent pipeline, the development culture, or the iteration speed to compete in that arena. The big three at least have the financial scale to attempt a pivot. The smaller Japanese brands do not even have that luxury. Factor 9, Mazda, Subaru, Mitsubishi, too small to survive alone. The crisis is not limited to Toyota, Honda, and Nissan. The smaller Japanese brands are in existential trouble with fewer resources, fewer options, and nowhere to hide. Mazda sells roughly 1.2 million vehicles per year globally. That sounds like a lot until you realize that a full EV transition requires an estimated $10 billion or more in platform development, battery partnerships, software infrastructure, and factory retooling. Mazda does not have that kind of capital, and their volume does not generate enough profit to fund it. Subaru is even smaller at around 900,000 units per year and is almost entirely dependent on the United States market for survival. One meaningful shift in American buying preferences toward Chinese EVs, which is already beginning, and Subaru's entire business model collapses. Mitsubishi is effectively a subsidiary of the crumbling Renault-Nissan alliance, with no independent EV strategy whatsoever. As that alliance disintegrates, Mitsubishi's future becomes a question with no good answer. And then there is Suzuki. Suzuki already withdrew from the US and European car markets entirely because they could not compete. Their survival now depends almost completely on India, which is their single biggest market by a massive margin. And Chinese brands led by BYD and MG are now entering India with aggressive pricing aimed directly at the affordable vehicle segment that Suzuki has owned for decades. These brands do not have the capital to develop competitive EV platforms on their own. They do not have the software engineering talent. They do not have the manufacturing scale to drive per unit costs down to Chinese levels. The math leaves three outcomes: merge with a larger company, get acquired by a Chinese or Western automaker, or slowly shrink into irrelevance over the next decade. There is no fourth option when the industry demands tens of billions in investment just to remain competitive. And while the small brands fight for survival domestically, the global export map that Japanese automakers spent 50 years painstakingly building is being completely redrawn. Factor 10, export markets, flipping to China. The numbers here do not require interpretation or spin. They speak for themselves. Japan exported 4.4 million vehicles in 2023. China exported 4.9 million. In 2024, China pushed past 5.3 million. Japan is no longer the world's largest car exporter, and the gap is widening every single year. Russia, which was a significant and profitable Japanese auto market for decades, now buys almost exclusively Chinese vehicles after Western sanctions cut off Japanese and European supply chains. That market is gone, it is not coming back, and Chinese brands have filled the vacuum completely. The Middle East, Africa, and Latin America were traditional Chinese strongholds going back to the 1970s. The reliable Hilux, the affordable Corolla, the indestructible Land Cruiser. These were the vehicles that built Japan's global reputation in developing markets, one dusty road at a time. Now, Chinese brands are arriving in these exact markets with lower prices, newer technology, full EV options, and a hunger to dominate that mirrors exactly how Japanese brands entered these markets 50 years ago. The playbook is the same. The country running it has changed. Even Australia, one of Japan's most loyal export markets on the entire planet, saw Chinese brand auto sales grow over 150% in 2024. Australia, the country where a Toyota Hilux is practically a national symbol, where driving a Japanese ute is part of the cultural identity. Even that market is shifting. The global territory that took Japanese automakers half a century to build is being lost in half a decade. And you might be thinking, at least Japan still has that one unassailable advantage left. The one thing every car buyer has heard their entire life: Japanese cars just last longer. That was true, past tense. Factor 11. The durability narrative is eroding. Buy Japanese because it will last forever. That single sentence sold more cars globally than any advertising campaign in automotive history. For decades, it was genuinely true and backed by real-world data. Japanese combustion engines, Japanese transmissions, Japanese build discipline and quality control. These were measurably and consistently more reliable than the competition. That earned advantage carried an entire national industry across the world. But here is the problem. Nobody in the Japanese auto industry wants to confront honestly. An electric vehicle has fundamentally fewer moving parts than a combustion vehicle. No engine with hundreds of precision components, no multi-speed transmission, no timing chains to stretch, no head gaskets to blow, no oil changes, no exhaust system to corrode. The mechanical complexity that Japanese engineers mastered and perfected over 50 years of relentless improvement is becoming irrelevant because the product itself has fundamentally changed. BYD now offers an 8-year, 500,000-kilometer warranty on its Blade battery pack. Early data coming out of China's National Vehicle Inspection System shows BYD and NIO failure rates that are comparable to Toyota and Honda within the first 3 years of vehicle ownership. The dataset is still young and the sample sizes will need to grow, but the trend line is clear. Chinese EVs are not failing at meaningfully higher rates than Japanese vehicles. You cannot sell "our engines last forever" when the global market is accelerating toward vehicles that do not have engines. The reliability moat that protected Japanese brands for decades is not being breached by a superior competitor. It is being made completely irrelevant by a fundamental change in what a car actually is. And the final factor is the one that removes Japan's last possible escape route. Factor 12, the yen problem on the surface. The weak Japanese yen should be helping. At 150 plus to the US dollar throughout 2024 and into 2025, Japanese exports become cheaper on every global market. Cars priced in yen cost less in dollars, euros, and every other currency. And temporarily, it did help. Japanese vehicles got a modest price boost in dollar-denominated export markets. But the weak yen is a trap disguised as relief. A weak yen simultaneously is importing components more expensive, and modern Japanese vehicles depend heavily on parts sourced from across Asia, Europe, and North America. Margins get squeezed from both directions. Export revenue looks better on paper, but the actual profit on every unit sold shrinks because input costs are rising at the same time. The deeper and more damaging truth is this: even with a significant currency advantage making their vehicles cheaper globally, Japanese brands are still losing market share to Chinese competitors quarter after quarter. The yen is actively helping on price, and they are still losing. That tells you the problem is not about price alone. It is about product, technology, and speed of innovation, areas where a weak currency provides zero advantage. And when the yen eventually strengthens, and currencies always cycle, the pricing problem does not just return, it becomes catastrophic. Japanese vehicles become more expensive on global markets at the exact moment Chinese competitors are scaling up production volume and driving their per-unit costs down even further through vertical integration and manufacturing efficiency. Chinese automakers can absorb currency fluctuations because their domestic supply chains are fully vertically integrated. BYD manufactures its own batteries, designs its own semiconductor chips, builds its own electric motors. The entire value chain from raw materials to finished vehicle is controlled internally. Japanese automakers cannot replicate that structure. Their supply chains are distributed across dozens of countries, complex to manage and expensive to operate. This is not a currency cycle problem that time will fix. This is a structural cost disadvantage baked into the Japanese automotive manufacturing model with no clear solution. Japan built the most respected auto industry on Earth over the course of 50 years. Disciplined engineering, relentless quality control, manufacturing efficiency that business schools turned into case studies, and a reputation for reliability that became so universal, it stopped being an advantage and simply became the expectation. China is dismantling that empire in 5 years, not through cheap knockoffs, not through government subsidies alone. Through better technology, genuinely lower prices, development cycles 4 times faster, and a vertically integrated manufacturing model that Japanese cost structures cannot match no matter how many factories they close or how many jobs they cut. 12 factors. Every single one of them is getting worse, not better. And the window for Japan to mount a meaningful response is closing faster than any industry forecast, predicted even 2 years ago. If you want to see which specific Chinese models are replacing the most popular Japanese cars right now, model by model and price by price, that full breakdown is on screen now.